If you love classic contemporary Christian music and the people that made it, please like this video and subscribe to our channel to help support us and keep us going. This is Stage Right, and I am your host, John Thorne. They say if you die with a handful of friends, you die a rich man. Well, I have several buses full, and I'm very excited to share them all with you. Welcome to Stage Right. I am your host, John Thorne. Thanks for tuning in today for episode 4, featuring my good friend Scott Allen from Mylon Broken Heart. It's hard to imagine now with things in the church being the way they are, but there was a time when contemporary Christian music or Christian rock was looked down on in the church. There was always the sentiment that it offended the older people and they didn't like it. But now people in their 70s who attend church grew up loving the Beatles, so rock music and drums were part of their pop culture experience, which is why they don't get so freaked out by loud music and drums if they're executed properly. Emphasis, executed properly. However, back in the early 80s, bands like Petra, Russ Taff, the Imperials, Joe English, Second Chapter of Acts, and on, they were shunned by a lot of churches and a lot of preachers, especially those on TV. It was another version of the age-old fight in the church over what music is acceptable and what music is illegitimate for the church. When I was a freshman at Lee College, which is now Lee University, this guy and his band came up from Mount Perrin Church of God in Atlanta to play a concert for the student body. He was a new Christian artist who just happened to be Church of God, which is what I grew up in, which meant maybe he was safe enough for everyone because he's part of the tribe. Now, who was this artist, you're wondering? It was Mylon Broken Heart. His first album came out, and it was so good and had such huge impact on my life. Around the same time, a beautiful new family started attending my dad's church in Grand Ledge, Michigan. Their names were Gene, Gail, and Angie Gordon. I got to know them well over the years, and I think it's safe to say that no one loved contemporary Christian music more than Gene, and he also loved Mylon Lefevre more than anyone I had ever met. Gene passed away several years ago, but I didn't want to do my show today without first acknowledging how much Gene loved Mylon Lefevre and Broken Heart, and how much we all love and miss Gene. And now a quick word from our sponsor, Hey Rockstar, before Scott Allen joins us.
Hey Rockstar provides digital marketing software and services to generate more leads, more exposure, and more revenue for your business or organization. Let Hey Rockstar amplify your awesomeness.
So, your daughter Nicole says you are the very best dad in the world, and we will take her word for it. My guest today, Mr. Scott Allen. How you doing, Scott?
Hey, how you doing?
I'm good. So, I want to start from the beginning. For those that don't know, tell everyone where you grew up.
I grew up in Mount Pleasant, Michigan. My parents were educators, and so grew up around Central Michigan University. And so from the time I was about 5 years old, really until I was about 18, I was in Mount Pleasant, Michigan.
Wow, that's crazy because I grew up in Grand Ledge, which is by Lansing. So the first time I saw you play with Mylon and he introduced you from Mount Pleasant, I'm like, oh my God, that kid's right up the street.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so what was your earliest musical memory?
Oh my gosh. It starts way back for me. My brother was a musician who played pretty much every weekend. He was older than me, but he was really into music when he was younger too. And so, I feel like a lot of my influences and everything really came from the records that were in my house.
Right.
So it was everything from, Hendrix to Beatles to Grand Funk. So I feel like, he really kind of introduced me, and my dad was super supportive of both of us on our interest in music. And so I started going to concerts when I was maybe 6 or 7 years old.
Oh my goodness.
So like, went to see Blood, Sweat, and Tears and Neil Diamond and Three Dog Night, and the list goes on and on and on. When I was little, like really almost too little to appreciate it.
Right.
So I really feel like that kind of helped formulate my vision or fueled the fire for the calling that God already had on my life. And I wasn't even saved then, but feel like, all of those influences just really kind of played into everything.
Right. Did you have a church background at all?
Not at all. I mean, when I was really little, my parents were members of a church and it was very ethnically diverse and racially diverse. And so, our friends group, we were, kind of some of the few white people. So, all of my friends and people that I thought of as aunts and uncles. And, I grew up really kind of around a lot of Black people and my parents, but a lot of them were involved in the civil rights movement in the 60s. And
Wow.
so I feel like I grew up with such a wonderful picture of being able to embrace differences and have diverse friend groups and all of that. So yeah, but it was very early on, like maybe up until like kindergarten age, maybe. And then we didn't go to church at all as a family until I went when I was a teenager. And I went one time when I was maybe 8 or 9 years old and had just a really significant encounter with the Holy Spirit and didn't know what it was even then, but I didn't get saved until I was about 14.
So how did you get saved?
Man, I had a friend who had been kind of a neighborhood friend that I'd grown up with since I was maybe 5 years old, and we were kind of best friends through grade school. And just one day, he invited me to come to church with him.
That's awesome.
It was a setup. I think he was setting me up, and I think the Sunday school teacher was setting me up, but mostly it was God setting me up. And I heard a very clear gospel message that day, and I knew that God loved me and had a plan for me. And it was, even at 14 years old, I really was kind of a searcher and a seeker, and it felt like it just really checked all the boxes for me for what I'd been looking for. And so, I can kind of point to the spot on the road in the middle of Mount Pleasant where I asked Jesus to be the Lord of my life. And it really was just because a friend was faithful to invite me, and a Sunday school teacher was bold about sharing the gospel.
So you get saved as a teenager. You start going to church at that point?
I did, yeah. That the church that I got saved in became my church, and it was just really an incredible experience. They were big on discipleship, and as a high schooler, they connected me with a college age mentor who really taught me how to pray, taught me how to memorize scripture, and really began to like systematically disciple me. And our pastor was a pastor's pastor, just such a great shepherd, and just had such an incredible influence on my life, but really on our whole family.
That's fantastic. So you have a great pastor, someone that cares about you and your family. Now, how did you decide that you were going to pursue Christian music and get into music back before it was like cool and trendy?
Well, the music part started really before I was saved. I was a drummer before I was anything else. I really was kind of trained as a drummer and a percussionist, and played in jazz band in junior high, and played for some junior high and high school musicals. And so the music part of it really was long before I got saved. And then in the process, I had this conversion experience and found Jesus. And really the desire to play guitar came out of just a desire to worship.
Right.
The church that I got saved in was a Presbyterian church. So the music on Sunday morning was very traditional. it was organ music and singing out of the hymnal
Mm-hmm.
and all of that. But because I grew up in a college town, they really embraced college ministry.
Oh, that's awesome.
So I grew there. They did, a Sunday afternoon service that was acoustic guitars and more modern music and all of that. And that really kind of lit the fuse for me to want to just kind of explore my boundaries beyond drums. And so it kind of started more as a personal experience for me. And so really, I'm a self-taught guitar player, and grabbed a chord book and a chord poster and listened to a lot of records and learned how to play guitar that way.
Man, that's exactly how I did it. It's exactly how I did it. I just picked it up. I loved it. And I didn't play in church, though. Our church didn't have, I played bass some my last 2 years before I left and went on the road at 18. But our church didn't have a Sunday afternoon service where contemporary music or guitar and stuff was introduced. So ours was kind of piano, organ, and stuff until after I left home. I find it really fascinating that you became a Christian and started getting involved in. It's just funny how God just lines it up and pulls you in a direction.
Absolutely.
So how old do you think you were when you started feeling God pulling you towards music ministry?
I was maybe 15. And at that time, there was an emerging Christian music scene on the West Coast. Larry Norman, Randy Stonehill,
Right.
Tom Howard, and those guys. And so I began to explore, okay, there's music that I can relate to that's Christian music, and I'm feeling this call to ministry, but it doesn't look like me going to seminary
Right.
and pastoring a church like my pastor. And so, I just thank God every day that I had a pastor who could pastor me through my calling.
Right.
And he really did. And I went to him as a 15-year-old, asked to meet with him. And I just said, I didn't even know how to put words around it, but I'm really feeling like I'm supposed to be doing ministry, but I don't think it looks like what you do. And feeling this call to music and to evangelism. I didn't even know what to call evangelism, but he was so great and gracious to help me recognize that it was God that was dealing with me and to really validate what God was saying to me. And so as a result of that, I felt like I had not only direction, but that I had some momentum into realizing, okay, this is what I'm sensing is valid. So even though I don't see a huge picture for it yet,
Right.
this is really what I'm sensing that I'm supposed to do is travel and do music and share Jesus with people, at 15 years old. And, and then like you, I went on the road when I was 18. And so, I kind of had 3 years to, figure out what that looked like for me. And so before I went on the road, I would travel on the weekends and do youth groups, do concerts for youth groups or, rallies or
Right.
retreats or that kind of stuff. Just me and an acoustic guitar, and I started writing music during that time too.
That's fantastic.
And I would imagine if I pulled out any of those songs, it would be pretty cringy, but, but at the same time, I can see how the ministry and the craft really developed in me, from the age of about 14 or 15 to 18 before I went on the road.
Okay, so now take me to the moment in time when you found out Mylon was looking for a guitar player.
Well, I had already been on the road for about 2.5 years with a group called Found Free that later became Bash in the Code.
Oh my goodness.
And so during that time, Debbie and I were my wife Debbie and I were college sweethearts, and she was finishing her degree and I was traveling full time with Found Free. And we got to the point where it was time to get married, and I didn't really want to drag her into that gypsy-like world of just traveling all the time and not really having a home. And so I came off the road, and just for what ended up being the first few months of our marriage, because I really wanted to commit to starting a life with Debbie that had some kind of solid ground on it. So I was living in Philadelphia. We got married. We moved to South Carolina. I was producing Christian television, and we connected with a local church that really was a kind of a grounding place for us. And this is going somewhere, by the way.
Oh no, you're fine. You're fine.
So during the course of all of that, we took a weekend and we went to visit my old band at Myrtle Beach because they were doing a Christian music festival there on the beach. And so we thought, okay, it'll be cool to reconnect with everybody and all of that. And while we were on the beach, this guy that I don't ever remember seeing or meeting ever in my life, and I don't think that I had, walked up to me and called me by name. He said, "Hey, Scott, how are you doing?" And I kind of gave him the typical, "Oh yeah, doing good, man, doing good," and just very surfacey. And this guy proceeded to completely read my mail, and so he was either the most incredibly accurate prophetic person in the world that I had ever encountered, or it potentially was an angel, or I don't know. The amount of things that God had revealed to this person was just so spot on down to the details. And the bottom line of it was, he said to me, "God's not through with you with music yet, and your best and your greatest days are ahead of you in ministry." So the two conclusions were that God wasn't through with me yet, and very specifically, he said to me, "Mylon needs a guitar player, and you need to call him right away."
Oh my goodness.
And so, Debbie and I were driving home from the beach and just kind of looked at each other and was like, what was that? It was too stunningly accurate
Right.
about where I was at in my life and what I felt like God was saying to me about the future, that I couldn't ignore it. And so Debbie and I agreed, okay, Monday, call Mylon's office and just see, if this is real or not. And called that Monday morning, and sure enough, he needed a guitar player. And they said, yeah, we need the guitar player right away. We just finished an album, about to start touring on it. And we need a guitar player.
Now, were you listening to Mylon before you joined the band?
I was aware of Mylon, and at that point they only had one album out. And so I met them. The band that I was with was doing the same Christian music festival that they were doing. And so we met, and so I was familiar with his music and familiar with the ministry style and all of that. And so, yeah, I was familiar enough to know what I would be getting myself into. So
you knew if you wanted to call or not.
Yeah. So they said, yeah, just send us a demo tape and send us a letter, saying, telling us about yourself and all of that. So the short end to this long story is, within 2 weeks, we were in Atlanta to meet the band, to meet Mylon, to do an audition. And what was going to be just kind of a short conversation ended up being hours long, and it felt like we had been lifelong friends. And the audition, I didn't know what was going to happen with that. It was time to go to dinner, so we went out to dinner with Mylon and his mother and his family I think it was to celebrate his mom's birthday. Anyway, so that night at dinner, he's introducing me to everyone as his new guitar player.
Oh, that's great.
So no audition. It really was I guess, such a confirmation to him. And I could go into even more detail about how confirming it was to him. So the reality was, really within a few weeks of me even finding that out, I started traveling with him.
That is so cool.
And it was right as the More album was coming out. So I did that whole tour starting in 1983.
Right. Now, the reason I say that's so awesome is not necessarily because of the hopping on that amazingly cool bus and touring with Mylon, but it's so awesome when God opens a door that's so obvious and so quick, you don't have to spend any of your soul trying to get his attention to see if he's still interested in you and using you and stuff. When a door that big and that wide opens up, it's fantastic feeling.
Yeah, it's amazing, and not every season of my life has been like that.
Right.
I've also experienced the opposite, experienced
Yes.
desert seasons and all that as well.
Absolutely.
But yeah, that it was a very quick on ramp.
So you've been in the band a couple years, you got the hang of everything, you're part of the band, everyone knows who you are, and then you guys shoot the Sheep and Wolves Clothing live concert video. I think you shot that at PTL, didn't you?
Yeah, the Sheep and Wolves Clothing.
Yes.
Yeah.
I would have to say my favorite moment in that entire concert video was when you started More acoustically and you guys played More. It's my favorite song from those first few albums, and what a great moment.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you for saying that. It was a very special moment every time we did it, and it's really cool to go back and look at 22-year-old or 23-year-old Scott there on a platform that I didn't earn or really deserve, and yet just amazing that God saw fit to use me that way.
Well, he did, and that's a perfect segue into what I wanted to say next. Mylon and Broken Heart probably had as much influence on me. The only other one that could come close to what the influence of me wanting to go into Christian music, not just be a musician, but actually pursue playing music for the Lord. It was Mylon and Broken Heart and Rust Half and the Imperials.
Wow.
I was on the road doing other things. I traveled as a singer in 1980, and then in 81, I went on the road with a group from Lee College for a couple of years. During that time, then even fast forward a few years later, I ended up in Truth with Mark Harris. I loved Mylon and Broken Heart, and you guys had such a profound impact on me. The music was fantastic. I wouldn't have pursued what I did had it not been for those years when I was in a van riding around playing churches, listening to you guys. I would have never done what I did without you guys. It pulled me in a direction where it was like, okay, I love God and I know he has a plan for my life and I love music, but these guys, this is what I want to do. I'm doing this, but this is really what I want to do. In fact, I rode the Truth bus, and you remember the tour jackets you guys sold at the record table?
I do remember that, yeah.
I had one of those. I left it, unfortunately, at a host home one time, and they never sent it to me. I'm like, who wouldn't send somebody their coat if they forgot it? Well, it was probably a Mylon Lefevre and Broken Heart fan that thought, oh, I got a free coat. Somewhere down south, someone's wearing my Mylon Lefevre tour jacket.
Oh, my gosh. So meantime, you're like completely off brand with Truth.
Oh, completely. It was completely off brand.
Well, hey, thanks for the free advertising. We appreciate it, man.
Oh, man. I'd get off the Truth bus in a Mylon coat. Everybody was like, is that, you play for Mylon? No. I just love Mylon. Broken Heart's the best.
Oh, my gosh.
So at that point, you and I were not friends. But before I move on, I want to ask you just a few questions about that era with Broken Heart.
Okay.
So the live concert film you guys shot was at PTL. What was it like playing PTL during their heyday?
It was incredible. With all of the, challenges that they had, and, history, obviously, looking back on it, was unfortunately had really a sad ending to it. But at that time, Jim and Tammy, had kids that were starting to grow up, and they really had a passion for ministering to people. And so from my earliest days with Mylon, really kind of through that era, they would bring us in regularly to do concerts there. And really the video was put together by the production staff at PTL, and they gave them the freedom to do that. And so really it was a partnership between us and the record label and PTL putting that whole thing together. And, they built the sets, and they had such a heart for reaching people that they were very, very inclusive and just kind of let us be who we were and do what we do.
Right. That was in the barn, correct?
It was in the barn, yeah.
In 1980, I was singing with a woman named Nancy Harmon. She was from California.
I know Nancy.
You do?
I do.
No way. Okay, so I sang with her that's who I went on the road with after I graduated from high school. So I sang with her, and the first time I was on PTL was October 21st, 1980.
Oh, wow.
So we would do the TV show at the studio downtown Charlotte, and then we would go out. We went out on a Thursday night and did camp meeting at the barn. And at the time, it was the only building on the property of Heritage USA. So then, fast forward to 1997, I was road managing Petra, and a promoter had rented the studio portion of the barn to do the Petra concert. So it was the PTL studio with the seats where everybody sat, and the backdrop was the Italian cafe kind of feel thing.
Oh my gosh.
That's where Petra played, and the only thing that was there, the only thing that was really left at the time, there was nothing out there except the barn. So it was kind of weird because I was there when they were building it, and then I went back all those years later with Petra, and it was the only thing really functioning. And so I was walking around the back behind what would have been out to the loading dock from the TV studio, and there were these two big pictures of Mylon Lefevre and Broken Heart and Russ Taff. And you know what I did?
What did you do, John? Is this confession time?
This is confession. I took them.
Oh my gosh.
I took them because they were just going to get thrown away with all the sets, the couches, fake trees, the powder blue bandstands. You remember the powder blue bandstands the band used to play at?
Oh yeah.
All those were piled up. They were just going to throw it all away. And I thought, you know what? These two things mean something to me. And so I grabbed them and I took them.
Wow.
It's funny because back then, Jim and Tammy were probably the only ones supporting Christian rock. There were lots of preachers on TV that were not supporting it.
Yes. Yes, I'm fully aware. You are now preaching to the choir.
So that's my segue. What was it like riding the bus, basically battling people on the same team?
Yeah, it was such an interesting and challenging time for sure. And yet, you know, the one thing that I can say in retrospect is that we were connected with a local church that saw the value in what we were doing and saw the value in it enough that they assigned us a sweet elderly couple. Actually, they volunteered, but to disciple us. And Dr. Mack had planted churches and Bible colleges all around the world and wrote the ministry statement for the Church of God in Cleveland. And this was not a novice that they assigned to us.
Right.
They assigned a general
Right.
to us. And so looking back on it, I think the one thing in that season that probably helped us to stay grounded and stay on point and keep doing the ministry that we were doing was that we had a local church that loved us enough to pour into us on a weekly basis.
Right.
And spiritual mom and dad who walked us through that season, and it was incredible.
To me, one of the biggest things missing in the church now are mentors.
Yeah, I agree. And one of my scriptures now being the age that I am, that I love is the value of a father. You know, you can have thousands of teachers, but the value of a dad
Right.
in your life is so incredible. And we for sure had that.
During that time, you guys are riding around in this amazing bus. Take 30 seconds and describe your bus.
It was very, at the time, very space age looking, and
It was.
one of a kind coach. The people that Neoplan, the people that made it, were the people who built the coaches that they would use for city buses and, you know, airport shuttles and, you know, the articulating buses and all that kind of stuff. And they wanted to get into the over-the-road coach market, and we didn't know that they had never done it, and so we were the guinea pigs. But yeah, so it was a really, really unique ride. I'm sure there's pictures of it on Mylon's website, I think.
It's crazy, dude, how it was so awesome because when you sit at the table, you're sitting above the driver.
Yeah.
It was so cool.
Which is great until it's the middle of the night and you wake up and you don't see anybody driving the bus.
You feel like you're dreaming.
You go down a hill too fast and around a curve too fast, and you wake up and there's no driver.
You had like this epic music video, Trains Up in the Sky. The budget for that must have been crazy back then, because that's before you could make a video on a home computer. I mean, we're talking serious budget, crazy, crazy cool bus. Were you guys really on top of the bus riding down the freeway in that one shot, or were those stunt doubles?
No, it was us. It was that whole video was shot, with the exception of a couple of scenes. The train, I think, was shot in Atlanta, but that whole thing was shot in Key West.
Okay.
And so we're on that like super long bridge over the ocean, getting from the mainland to Key West, and they're like,
right.
The director had a plane, I think it was either a plane or a helicopter, and he's like, okay, here's what I want you guys to do. I want you to sit in the skylights, essentially that opened.
Yep.
So we pulled those back, and we're sitting in them, like going down the freeway at freeway speed. And it was the most unintelligent move I think ever. It made for a cool video, but it was pretty scary.
I can't believe they asked you to do that.
I can't either. And I'm not sure whose idea it was or who I need to thank for that, but it was definitely an experience.
That's got to be a cool thing to look back, though, and remember.
Yeah, it was pretty amazing.
Hey, Scott, tell me if you remember this. We were doing Fishnet 90 with you guys, and there was a weather delay, and you and I were sitting in the green room watching the TV monitor that was the stage feed that they would pipe cameras into so everybody could keep track of the festival and who was on and watch their sets and kind of get a feel for the crowd or whatever. There was one guy, the whole place was cleared out, but there was one guy out on a hill on his knees with his hands up in the air, getting soaked. It was a torrential downpour. And he's just sitting out there on his knees with his hands up in the air. Do you remember this?
I didn't until you said that, but I do remember it now.
Do you remember what we said?
Oh no! What did we say?
I looked at you. I looked at you and I said, "Well, do you think it's working?" Referring to his praying. And you said to me, "Well, it all depends. If he's praying for rain, yes, it's working." And the video guys had locked down a camera shot on this guy and walked away. So literally for hours, the only thing on the screen was this guy and it was funny because I always joke now, would people do what they do if there were no cameras rolling? Well, this guy was actually praying and didn't realize the cameras were rolling, and it was one of the funniest things ever.
That's awesome.
What year was it you won a Grammy for Crack the Sky? Was it 88?
Yes, it was 88. We had been nominated a couple of times already, and we had made the decision that we weren't going to go to the awards show. They convinced us to attend the local NARAS party in Atlanta, and it was not the coolest environment because it was in a bar, and people were partaking and getting a little bit too tipsy, and so it was just an uncomfortable environment. And so I said to the local chapter head there, I was like, you know what, this is good. I think we're going to cash it in. Mylon was deathly sick that night and at home, and he said, hold on. And I was like, hold on, no, I just want to go, man. And he's like, they just told me that you guys won. And I'm like, what?
Oh, that's awesome.
So we actually, there were a couple of us that were there at the NARAS party in Atlanta. And so in the midst of a bar where people, had been drinking too much, and there was just, a typical bar environment, but they had the awards on that night, and then they would do local breaks during commercial breaks and that kind of stuff.
Right.
So we actually kind of got to accept the award and testify right in the middle of that environment to how good God was, and to thank our local chapter and all of that. So yeah, that was a pretty crazy environment.
That's awesome. You guys also won a Dove Award for that album, correct?
The Dove Award was for the Sheep and Wolves Clothing video, for long form video, and then there was another one for the song One by One, which was for a rock recorded song of the year, and that was on the Face the Music album.
Now, do you have a favorite album from that time?
Man, from the later years, I think I have an equal fondness for all of them for different reasons.
That's great.
But that era, really, Face the Music, actually, the Crack the Sky era was when I started writing more for the band, and the Face the Music era was when I started getting more into the production.
Cool.
It really was like kind of a time where the behind-the-scenes recording craft got developed in me.
I want to transition because I know you have been heavily involved in church ministry for the last 20-some years.
That is correct. Yeah, about 20, this year will be 23 years.
So how was the transition for you from touring musician, where everyone that you meet is glad to see you, and then you go into the ministry where it's 50-50. Are you glad to see me, or do you just need my help?
The decision really to come off the road and all that really was a family decision.
Right.
My kids were kind of young, early grade school age, and I needed to be able to be there for my kids. I didn't want to be the dad that was so busy doing ministry that I was missing in action at their awards presentations, or at their choir concerts, or for their sporting events and that kind of thing. And so I think that whole gear shift really came as a result of me recognizing that that my first ministry really needed to be my wife and kids. And Debbie and I had been in agreement about my calling all that time, and she was so great and supportive. And but she and I made that decision together, and my kids didn't have that luxury.
Right.
And so what I felt like God was saying to me was, this is a season where you need to devote yourself to being a father. So really, it was an opportunity for me to be home and to plug in, and it actually ended up being a very fulfilling season, because it kind of brought together everything that from my past, not just music, but also, audio and video and,
right.
Communications things and all of that were all kind of a part of my training and background. And it was a season really where I learned to fall in love with the local church.
Oh, that's awesome.
And so, it's not to say that it's not without bumps or, sheep bites or any of that, but I really learned in that season to fall in love with what God was doing with a local congregation. Debbie and I both really kind of threw ourselves into local church ministry at that point, and there were seasons when I was doing music and worship, and seasons when I wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, I kind of felt like, when I hit my early 30s, I had kind of checked off everything in my life that I ever wanted to do, and God had been so gracious to allow me to kind of fulfill everything that I had in my heart as a young man. And so it was really a season for God to redefine for me what the new vision was. And so as a result, I really have fallen in love with the local church and what God is doing. And I believe that a healthy local church is the hope of the world.
Absolutely. A healthy version.
Healthy.
Right.
Yeah.
So the last time I was in Dallas, you and I had lunch. It's been 6 years ago?
Yeah, maybe about 6 years ago.
So he picked me up and we went to this amazing Mexican restaurant, and we're sitting in this really nice restaurant having lunch. And you and I were in transition for the exact same reason. And we were in the same exact spot in life. It was crazy. And I remember you and I stopping in the middle of our lunch and praying right there in the restaurant for God to lead you and for God to lead me. And it was such a cool God moment for me. I will never forget that the rest of my life.
It marked me too, John. It was a God moment, and it was so great to reconnect with a friend, especially when you go through difficult seasons in ministry and it's transition and you don't have any answers and all of that. It's so easy to feel isolated, and what I felt is, here's somebody who understands what I'm facing right now, and I hope that you felt the same as well.
Absolutely. Oh, that's exactly why it was so meaningful, because it's like, okay, God brought us together for this few hours. It was remarkable on so many levels. I won't even get into it, but it was definitely something I'll remember the rest of my life.
That's awesome. Yeah, me too. It was very timely.
So take a minute, Scott, and fill the listeners in on everything that's transpired in your life, in your family, in your ministry, where you landed, and all of that in the last several years.
Yeah, it's been amazing. I think I had been in a season where I had allowed myself to become unhealthy, and I think I ended up, going into that season where you and I had lunch. I was having real identity issues. I had been doing ministry so long that my identity was wrapped up in what I did instead of in being a son. And I'd like to say, man, it all turned around at that lunch, and I think it may have actually intensified after that.
Mm-hmm.
But what I learned in that season was that God was far more interested in me as a son than he was as a servant or as a minister.
That's awesome.
And what I learned in that season, and I'm still endeavoring to learn, is that it's more important to be than to do.
Right.
And, I needed to learn how much God valued and loved me as a son apart from anything that I could do for him.
Right.
Honestly, I felt like I had this desert season maybe for several years, and God was gracious enough to give me a spot to start serving at what I believe is one of the greatest and healthiest churches in the world, at Gateway Church here in Dallas, Fort Worth. And the spot that he gave me was an inconspicuous spot where I could continue to heal and to grow. And, and now I'm serving on staff at one of our campuses as our care pastor, and just surrounded by a great team. And interestingly enough, the campus pastor that I serve under was a guy who was newly saved in the early 80s and came to see this beach outreach in Panama City, Florida, with Mylon and Broken Heart and Russ Taff.
Oh, that's awesome. All right on.
And he just has told me numerous times how much that really kind of helped set the course for his life as a worship pastor, and then sensing the part that music was going to play in his ministry. And he was a worship pastor until just really a couple of years ago. And so that was a really kind of cool full circle connection.
Tell our listeners what you told me a few weeks ago when we talked about what's going on at Gateway Church since the pandemic.
Wow. Yeah, the pandemic was obviously, I think we're all to a degree still in shock that this is the world that we live in now. And what we through several iterations of regrouping and all of that, and because we have great leadership that walked the season, we as a church decided to really embrace that God was doing something different and something new, and to see the limitations in not being able to gather together, to see the limitations as an opportunity to redefine what ministry looks like, at least in this season, and potentially, from now on. And so we we made a shift to a completely online model, but it was an online model where we were also gathering in virtual lobbies and having conversations in Zoom rooms like we would have in a lobby. And our campuses were our leadership teams and our people of our campuses were still gathering as leadership teams and campuses around a weekend service. And we really saw our elders and our senior leadership really saw the need for being a resource to our community. And so we, thank God for a generous group of leaders, and they really kind of initiated this campaign here locally, and really even kind of around the country, where if someone had financial need, it was we were going to be able to help them at least to a degree, regardless of their ability to connect or their history of connecting with Gateway Church. And so we really I've watched it more than done it, but I've really been like pleasantly surprised at how it's been an incredible opportunity to redefine what generosity looks like and what ministry looks like, and to do things that are meaningful to people in a season where they're hurting.
Right. So how many people do you think you guys minister to every week online?
I wish I had those stats, but I don't. I know at one point it was well over 100,000.
Every week?
Every week.
Oh my goodness. That's remarkable.
Yeah, and that's not to say, that those are conversations necessarily, but those are people that are connecting to the services.
Right.
But there's also, I think every week now, even through online connections, we are actually having conversations with upward of 700 people a week that don't attend a Gateway campus or may not even live in our area, that are ministry opportunities.
That's fantastic. I applaud the leadership at Gateway for not being shy about trying to reach the world.
Me too, John. It's just been such a blessing to be a part of it, and I feel like as long as I've been doing ministry, I'm probably learning more in this season than I ever have.
I just can't imagine working at a church that does so many things well and gets so many things right. It just has to be incredibly motivating and exciting to go to work every day.
Well, it certainly is for us. We consider ourselves so blessed to be surrounded by such a great community and surrounded by not just healthy ministry model, but surrounded by really healthy people.
Right.
It's been a great season for us to do ministry here at Gateway.
That's awesome. Before I wrap up with you, I can't thank you enough for doing this for me today. You were one of the first people I thought of when I wanted to do the podcast. I'm so glad you said you would do it. Before I let you go, there's a couple of things I wanted to mention. You have a new grandson, Asher.
I do. Asher's awesome. I have two grandsons. I have Cash and I have Asher, and they have the same mom and dad, our daughter and our son-in-law, and they live about 25 minutes from us. So we get to see them quite regularly, and Asher's great. He's healthy. Couple of months old, and trying to figure out all of the couple of month old baby stuff, and he's
Right.
got like a crazy head full of hair for a little guy. He's well on his way to being a rock star.
Oh, that's great.
And his older brother Cass is 4, and both of those boys are just such a blessing and the light of our lives. And of course we love our kids too.
Absolutely. Yeah. So our oldest daughter had our first grandbaby back in May, on May 21st. And the other day, my wife read me this meme that said, "Grandchildren are God's way of thanking you for not killing your children."
I have heard that. Man, it sure is a blessing to have grandkids, and it's like a whole nother level of I didn't know I had that much more room in my heart to love more family, but it's awesome.
Speaking of Asher and his hair, if he wants to be a rock star, he's got a great role model. Well, obviously, your son has also taken some of that inspiration. You want to tell everyone about your son's musical ventures?
Sure. Yeah. Well, like I said, my daughter and son-in-law live here locally in Dallas-Fort Worth, and my son lives in Tulsa with his wife. They're both very creative people. She has a floral design business and just incredible influencer. And my son, Justin, is a musician, and people kept trying to call him my mini-me or my junior or whatever. And really, in a lot of ways, he's my 2.0.
Right.
He plays everything and sings great, and he writes his own music and has produced several albums. And so he is a solo artist, but he goes under the band name Endless Forms.
Endless Forms.
And he just recently, in the last few months during the COVID season, one of his songs got picked up in a top 10 Netflix show, and so he in 1 month had a million views on YouTube, and so he kind of went from being in anonymity to really having some great interest in the marketplace and all of that. And we're proud of him for his efforts in artistry, but we're more proud of who he is as a man. He's an awesome guy.
Absolutely. Well, I'm sure if he's your son, he's an awesome guy because you're one of the best, Scott.
Well, John, I appreciate you saying that. I love you, buddy.
I love you too, man. And I appreciate you taking the time. So, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Scott Allen. Thank you, Scott. I will talk to you soon. And the next time I see you, lunch and dinner is on me.
I'll take it.
All right. All right, buddy. I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks.
Hey Rockstar provides digital marketing software and services for your church to generate more interest, create more exposure, and reach more people. Let Hey Rockstar amplify the awesomeness of your ministry. And, as always, Hey Rockstar is a proud sponsor of the Stage Right with John Thorne podcast.
Thank you for listening. Thank you, Scott Allen, for joining me. Thank you, Hey Rockstar. Next Thursday, Billy Smiley from Whiteheart. You do not want to miss it. Like, click, share, subscribe. Tell all your friends about the podcast. We will see you next Thursday.